Welcome to today's class. I'm Stephanie Jordan, Local Food Program Manager at Sustainable Solano. And this is our Tops to Roots Zero Waste Cooking class, which we are doing in cooperation with Republic Services. We want you guys to all learn about how to reduce the food waste in your own kitchens. So that is the point of our class today. And as many of you know, we have been doing a series of cooking classes to raise awareness of all the local food that is grown here in Solano County, California by our local farmers. These classes are also part of Sustainable Solano's larger vision to create a more resilient local food system here in Solano County. And a lot more on this project and our other work can be found on sustainablesolano.org. And so for any questions, I'm sure you guys know the drill. You can post them in the chat. And at the end of my little demo, Allison, our communications manager, will pull them off the chat. Or you may use the raise hand button and talk directly to either me or one of our guests today. So we wanted to do a class specifically on food waste prevention because there is some state legislation coming down. It's called Senate Bill or SB 1383. And before I get into cooking and talking about some tips and tricks, I do want to turn it over to Marie Knutson, who is the recycling coordinator at Republic Services. And she's going to tell us a little bit more about SB 1383 and how it will be affecting us in the months to come. So Marie, welcome. I'm going to turn it over to you and then I'll take that ball back in a few minutes.
Thank you, Stephanie. And
there you go. Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. And thank you, Stephanie, and thank you, Allison, for your tech support. So I'm Marie Knutson. I'm with Republic Services, your garbage and recycling hauler, and I take care of Benicia. So I have just some quick slides. I don't want to take a lot of time, but I'll tell you a little bit about what's going on. So this is my Garbage 101. And my email is at the bottom there, and then we can also put it in the chat if you have any questions after. So next slide, please. So why all this is happening? Why all these laws and recycling and food waste and all that? Well, basically, our landfills are going to be full in about 30 to 50 years. So what are we going to do with the garbage after that? What are we going to do with all this food waste? It won't have anywhere to go. So you're going to put it in your closet? I mean, what are you going to do with it? So who wants to spend money on good land for a garbage dump? Nobody wants to. They're not going to build anymore. So we got to not have garbage. In these landfills, they're creating methane gas from that food waste that's going in there. And it's mostly the organics that are doing it. And the gases from that are 72 times more potent than the carbon dioxide from our cars. So we're capping some of that gas and using it for electricity, but we can't get it all. So that's why we've got to get this food waste and our green waste out of the landfill and not keep putting it in the trash. So what is happening with this green waste? Well, you've heard a lot of it in the news lately. The global warming, it's melting the polar ice caps, it's causing sea rise. Our oceans are more acidic because they're warmer. There's less oxygen in it for the fish. We're seeing extreme fire seasons. We're seeing hurricanes and that. So it's definitely changing our atmosphere. And the scary part is we're only 5% of the world's population, yet we use 30% of the world's resources, and we create 30% of the world's trash. So compared to other nations and other countries, we like our stuff. How many pairs of shoes do you have? In our lifetime, they've created Ziploc baggies and single-use products like our picnic wear, single-use plastics and that. So our garbage is a little bit out of control. Next slide, please. And that's what it looks like. So you put it in your cart and you put it at the curb and it goes away, right? It doesn't really go away. It just gets buried in the landfill. So this is a picture of the Martinez transfer station where the Benicia trash goes in a lot of central Contra Costa. And there's other landfills all throughout California, but the trucks have big compactors in it and they squish everything in there as tight as they can. And then they get to the transfer station and there's a big wall in there and it pushes all that garbage out. And if I could spin that camera, you'd see just piles and piles of that garbage. And people don't think about it because they've thrown it away, it goes away. Well, it's just getting buried. So what they take is a bulldozer and they push all of that garbage to a big hole in the floor, and below it is a semi-truck waiting, and the top of it is open. And all of that garbage falls in the semi-truck, and then it trucks it to the actual landfill where it's going to get buried. So each of those semi-trucks holds 22 tons. There's 6 of them going all day long. They make 7 trips per day. That equals 924 tons of garbage, or 1,848,000 pounds of garbage going to just from this transfer station going to the landfill every day. So that's why all of these laws that seem uncomfortable, that's why they're so important. We've got to cut down on the trash and the organics in the landfill. So next slide, please. So here's those upcoming laws, and I'll just touch on them briefly because there's a few of them. They come from a state agency called CalRecycle, and they're the ones that have to get our diversion down and cut down on greenhouse gases. So they're the ones tasked with trying to figure out how to do this. And more than looking at the letters and that of the laws that exist already, look at the date. So for instance, AB 939, we've been trying to cut down on our diversion to the landfill down to 50% since 1989. On AB 32, it's trying to reduce the greenhouse gases. We've been telling everybody about that for 15 years. So how do we do this? How do we reduce that out of the landfill? Well, AB 341 had to do with recycling. We got everybody pretty much on board with that. You know, your water bottles go in the recycle, and so do cardboard and newspaper and all of that. Now we're working on the organics. And thank you, Stephanie, when you're in your kitchen, that's where you can make it happen, is to keep that out of the landfill. So the big law that's coming up in 2022 is that your green waste carts that you have at home, you'll be able to put all your food and food soiled paper into that cart. Now the city is already working with Republic to get that going. So in 2022, I'm really excited to say that's going to happen. Right now you can put in unprocessed fruits and vegetables into your green waste cart in Benicia. And those of you that are online, you may already have that in your city. So I hope that you're using that. The other things that are going to happen with that law is that there'll be universal colors of the containers. In Benicia, our recycling is tan, like cardboard, where in Walnut Creek it's blue. But wait, our trash in Benicia is blue. That's confusing. So everything will have to be labeled, and they'll start having universal colors for containers. The big one that I got in red there is there will be fines for contamination. So it's going to hit the city first. If the city is turning in a lot of contaminated containers, then they're going to get fined by CalRecycle. Well, they're going to roll it down to, okay, who's doing this? Well, the businesses and the residents that are putting all of their food waste in the trash still when the law comes out, or that are doing things like in their yard waste carts, throwing the plastic bags and stuff in there in the yard waste. That doesn't break down into dirt, so that's where we got to pay attention. And the last good thing with this law is that it's going to take the food that is still edible from, let's say, a Safeway or even the areas in Rite Aid where they've got food. It will go to people first. And if it's not edible for that, it'll go to animals second, for like pig farms. And third would be composting. So pretty excited about that. So that's the lineup of the laws that exist, and the big one that's coming up in 22, SB 1383. So watch for that one. I'll be out in force helping everyone to know what to recycle and compost. And next slide is just a quick posters that show you everything that can be recycled. I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of that, your glass, bottles, plastics. The ones and twos are the most important in the plastics. They're the most valuable. And there's your shot on the right side of what can be composted. It's not only food, any food, just scrape your plate right off into the green waste when that starts. It's coffee filters, coffee, food soiled paper, that nasty pizza box, all of that can break down into dirt. And I bring that back for compost giveaways twice a year. So here it comes. I'm excited. I hope you are too. And feel free to put any questions in the chat. And if I can't get to them right away, we'll get to them. I'll get an email out to you. And remember to sort smart and try and put your recycling as empty, clean, and dry, so that we're not contaminating everything else in that recycled load. So thank you for your time. I think I made it in 10 minutes, and off to Stephanie. And thank you again, Allison, for your help.
Thank you, Marie. That was very educational. And thank you for clarifying. I didn't realize there were all those other laws previous to 1383. So Sustainable Solano actually has submitted a grant. We don't know the results yet of this grant. It was to the EPA, and it was an environmental justice collaborative problem solving grant. And the purpose was to actually assist Food is Free Solano, who many of you may know, led by Heather Perini, to become that lead food rescue organization who could then help channel that prepared food from, say, the grocery store or the restaurant caterer or whoever out to those in need and try to fulfill that people first goal. So no word yet, but hopefully, I thought I might know by this class, but it just hasn't happened yet. So stay tuned. And if I remember correctly, I think that once we get to 2022, I think the businesses are going to be targeted first. Is that right, Marie? And then eventually the residents?
Yes, and the businesses already have the programs. So if you're out having dinner at a restaurant, ask them, do you have the organics program? But it's already offered to the businesses, and next year they'll start fines for contamination for them first, since they have the larger bulk of the food coming in.
Right. Okay, awesome. So that leads us to here and what we can do at home to try to cut back on getting organics or food scraps into the landfill, or to prevent getting food scraps into the landfill. We don't want them there because they're responsible for creating all the methane gas. So I'm going to kind of talk through a few things. We're going to talk about some tips and tricks and what you can do, how you can store certain products, and how you can use up different parts of products. And then I'm going to just demonstrate a very quick and easy jardinera, which you can use as a condiment for lots of different things. I lived in Chicago for 20 years, and if any of you guys know Chicago, you know that jardinera is everywhere. It's on every sandwich and roast beef thing or whatever. So It's all over. So I'm kind of excited to do that with you guys today. So the tops and the roots. So there's a lot of different foods that you might get from the store that, you know, show up like this. I have a bunch of beets, I have a bunch of carrots here, and perhaps we all know that you can use the root part, which is, you know, the beets and the orange part of the carrots, but what do we do with the top? So for the beets, on the beet tops, I would treat these like any other cooking green. The winter is coming, hopefully, and there will be lots of kale, there will be, you know, chard and similar types of greens. The beet greens can easily just be washed, spun dry, and sauteed in with those greens. And that way they're not wasted. Sorry, they had a little dirt there. I'm not actually going to do anything with the beets, but I'm going to kind of talk through it. So, you know, the leaves do have a little bit of a beet taste to them. I actually think they're really nice cooked and combined with the root part of the beet. You could also do things like, once you get it cooked up with your spinach or your chard or your kale, mix it in with some pasta, throw it on a pizza, put it on a little toast with some goat cheese. That would be fantastic. And maybe even combine both parts of the beet with that. So those are just some things you can do with the tops of the beets. Same story for radish tops. I actually love radishes cooked more than I like them raw. And so the greens, you can separate from the bottom of the radishes and saute those up when you saute your radishes. Put them in at the end, of course, because they cook really fast. The thing about the root vegetables is once you get them home from the store, you want to separate the roots from the tops. And the reason is the roots will start to, the tops rather, will start to draw moisture out of the roots, and then you won't have a very juicy carrot much anymore. So once I get these home, I would separate them. And the carrots especially like water, whereas the tops do not. So once you have them, you can just clean them, put them in a little bit of water, and then it'll help your carrots to stay nice and crispy. As for the tops on the carrots, you can make that into a pesto. You can mix it with some basil, some parsley, any other kinds of herbs that you might want. There's actually a recipe on our website, sustainablesolano.org. You can go to the local food page. There's a carrot top pesto, which I think I combined with some grilled carrots, maybe, if I remember correctly. It was a while ago. But that's something that you can do with those tops so that they don't end up in your compost bucket. All right. Let's see what else. The radishes we talked about. All right. So when you're working with your roots, whether it's a carrot, a potato, or whatever, I got a little muddy carrot here. So the question that I think we need to ask ourselves after we get it all cleaned up is, do you really, really need to peel it? Maybe you don't. You know, I tend to peel carrots for my kids, and I think I'm just not going to do that anymore. So if you don't have a good vegetable brush, now is the time to find some brushes. Carrots really have almost no skin at all. You just want to kind of brush down, get some of that surface dirt off, and then you're good to go. There's also more nutrients in that skin, whether it's a carrot or a potato. So just think, you know, do I really need to peel this? And if you don't, because then that's just avoiding more scraps going into the compost or perhaps into the landfill. So these are a couple different brushes. This is an OXO, which I do really like. It's got kind of a plasticky bristle, which means I can throw it into my dishwasher. So I use this to scrub oysters as well as dirty potatoes, and then just put it into the dishwasher. This one is made from more of a different kinds of hair from, I don't know if it's a animal, I can't remember exactly, but there's two different what am I trying to say? Like lengths and stiffness of the brush here. So this one's a little softer, which would be great for like a zucchini, and this one's a little more firm, which you would use on a more hardy vegetable, kind of like my beets over here. So the brushes, definitely find one that works for you, and then you use it up. If you do choose to peel, for example, potatoes, then think about how you can use those potato peels. So one idea is just to make like little potato skin chips. So once I peel my potatoes, you know, make sure you scrub them down good, toss it with a little olive oil, salt and pepper, put it on a sheet pan with some parchment, and then bake it off, and you'll have some little chips. So that's just one way to deal with your tops and roots on those kinds of vegetables. So I think what I'm going to do now is actually put together my jardinera, since we need to cook it a little bit. We have a brine that we're going to make. So my first ingredients are some cauliflower, which is right here. This is about 6 ounces of cauliflower. And, some parts of your vegetable are going to be a little bit difficult, but, this is like some of the leaves of the cauliflower. Also, just a little tip about the cauliflower. This is a huge head of it, by the way. It has these leaves that come up and around it. If you guys ever see cauliflower that's a little more yellowish, don't worry about that. That is completely normal. What farmers do to keep them white is actually wrap the heads with their leaves while they're in the field, and it keeps the sunlight from penetrating onto the part that we eat, which is the florets. So, if you see that, don't be concerned. It's totally usable, and don't throw it away. So for the jardinera, I've got my florets here. So I'm just going to cut these down into little, roughly 1-inch pieces. This is all going to go into a little quart jar. And if you do have, scraps along the way, another good thing you can do is just put it all into a stock pot, add some water, and make a little veggie stock. That would be fine with onion peels. You could use your garlic peels, which would add a really yummy flavor. Ends of tomatoes could go in there, all sorts of that. Okay. Just gonna get my veggies cut up here, and then we'll work on our brine. So let me think what else could go into your vegetable stock. If you have kale stems, that's another good one that is sort of like, sometimes they're kind of woody and they don't cook down all that great. So again, save it and throw it into a stock. All right. Okay, so there's the cauliflower. And then the next couple things are pretty quick and easy. I have a carrot over here, which I've already scrubbed, and then we have just a stalk of celery. So just the ends of my celery don't look too happy, but the rest of it is fine. So I'm just going to trim the ends there. And you know what? I don't think I need to. I'm just going to do thin slices. So for those of you that want to see a little knife skill refresher, I'm cutting forward and dragging my tip back. And cutting forward, and I've got my thumb and finger on the blade, and the other 3 fingers are around the handle. And so I'm going forward. It just takes some practice while you cut through the celery. And this is in about 1/4-inch size slices. Okay. Let's see. Oh yeah, this all goes together. Okay. All right. And my carrot. This carrot is a little bit fat, so I'm going to just halve it and then do the same thing that I did with the celery. Okay. And this is one of my favorite little tools, the scraper that enables you to get all the little pieces and parts off of your board. Okay, the next thing I need is a little bit of garlic. So I've got 2 cloves of garlic, which I'm just going to peel and then kind of smash. In this case, I peeled and smashed at the same time. I'm just cutting off the root end of the garlic, which makes that just pop right off. Okay, I'm just going to cut those in half and have those ready to go. All right, so now we're going to put together our brine. So for this, we want to use a seasoned rice vinegar. So this is just a very standard brand that you can find at almost any grocery store. And you want to make sure that it says seasoned, which means it has salt and sugar added to it. There is also unseasoned, which sometimes I use, but for this application, we want the extra salt and sugar added because it is, after all, a brine. Okay, so I'm doing 1 1/4 cups of the seasoned rice vinegar. By the way, let's see, Allison, you could probably show this recipe. I just realized I forgot to cue that up. So the recipes are going to be all on our website on a recipe page along with the video, which once it's all done, we will put up on the website with the recipe. All right, so we have our vinegar. I have a 1/4 cup of water added to this, and my garlic goes in, and then I'm going to add some spices. So I've got some red pepper flakes. You can adjust this however you would like. If you want it spicier, add a little more. I'm putting in 1/2 teaspoon. And then I have 1/4 teaspoon of both some yellow mustard seeds and some black peppercorns. There's the mustard seeds. And the peppercorns. Okay. And so that's all that goes in with the vinegar. I'm going to put it over here and bring this to a boil. We'll check that in a minute. Put the lid on. All right. So meanwhile, you want to find yourself a quart-sized glass jar, which is nice and clean. And again, this is not like a long-term, we're not doing any kind of canning process here. This is just kind of a quick pickle. Once this is all done, it'll keep for at least a week in your refrigerator, okay? So I'm just gonna put all of my vegetables that I just chopped up in here. I see a couple cauliflower florets that could be broken apart a little bit more. Other good additions to this would be some green olives, and also some peppers, like bell peppers, or you could even do sliced jalapeno peppers. That would also be really yummy. Okay, so that fits just like it's kind of supposed to. All right, so this is going to be on standby here. And then once my brine boils, we're just going to pour it right in and let it sit. And then that's pretty much all you do. You pour it in, you let it sit, wait for it to cool down completely, and then seal it up with your jar lid and put it in the fridge. Another thing that you guys can do, which to prevent food waste, I do this every day, is I have some painter's tape and a Sharpie. And so once I'm done with this, I will stick some tape on the top, date and label. That way you remember what it is, when you made it, and when you need to eat it up by. So any kind of leftover that you have, I highly recommend labeling and dating. It's standard procedure in any commercial kitchen or restaurant. I do it in my own fridge. That way I can look at the leftover salmon and see, oh, well, that was only 2 days old. Yes, I can eat that because I cook too much and I forget when I make things. So then I can also tell my family, look at the dates, pull the stuff that is oldest and eat that first. So, okay. So this pickling is, of course, one way that you can preserve some of your produce and keep it from, expiring and kind of going bad. Another thing that you could also do, other types of produce that would be good with this sort of application would be fennel, and also red onion or shallots. You could do like some pickled aromatics like that, which are great on tacos. Jicama would be another good one. Sometimes you end up with a big jicama. You need some of it, maybe half of it. What do we do with the rest of it? Pickle it up. All right. So the next thing I want to kind of talk about is the freezer and some things that you can do for freezing. So I know that Marie was talking about Ziploc bags. This is an alternative to Ziploc bags. This is a silicone storage bag, which you can use in the freezer. This is kind of one of the larger ones I have. This holds about 6 cups. Oops, I hear this boiling. Turn that down. Yep, okay. So hold on, let me pause and get our brine in there. We're all in there. We want to make sure that all the vegetables are submerged as much as possible. So I'm just going to kind of poke them down a little bit so that they're all the way in there. There we go. And then once they, as they're sitting here, you know, they're going to soften a little bit. And so I'll just kind of keep pushing down a little bit more as it sits. Let's see here, let me grab a towel. Okay. Okay, so there it is, pretty quick and easy. All right, back to our bag. So the silicone bag would be a reusable freezer bag that you can use. This one happens to be around 6 cups or so. It has this little slider thing that just goes over the top. This kind of stuff is on Amazon. You know, check it out. It's a good alternative to Ziplocs, which you just, you know, are like the throwaway thing. I mean, I try to reuse them as much as I can, but sometimes it just doesn't happen. Another tool for your freezer and freezing things are silicone molds, which I have left over from when my kids were babies. So I used to make baby food, put it in these little silicone molds. This is from the Bayaba Baby Cook machine. I think my mom is actually on this class. She probably remembers making pears and putting it in here. So I use these very frequently. We just made some pesto the other day. I make a big batch of pesto. I portion it up into this. I put it in, you know, put the cover on, put it in the freezer. It can then sit there, and once it's frozen, you can pop them out because these are, you know, squishy and soft. So you can just kind of pop out from the back your little balls of pesto, and then you can put it into your freezer bag and then put it back into the freezer. Sometimes I just get lazy and I just leave it in here because I know we're going to go through it fairly quickly. Another thing I put in here a lot is leftover pizza sauce if I'm making a pizza, or tomato sauce just from the big jar of tomato sauce that I know isn't going to get used up, you know, soon. So any kind of tomato product could definitely go in here. Also, another thing, you know, those chilies and adobo sauce. That's usually something where you just need a tablespoon, but you have this jar. So definitely take advantage of these sorts of products that will help you to freeze them and then use it at a later time. Some other things that you can freeze, which maybe you didn't think about, would be citrus zest. So you can do that in little trays or just in a little bag of some sort. You can freeze bananas, you can freeze butter, you can freeze buttermilk, just portion it out. You can freeze leftover egg whites. This is another good one. So let's say you've made creme brulee for a party and you've used up the yolks, but now you have whites. So you can put egg whites into something like this or an ice cube tray, put it in your freezer, and then when you need to whip it up for another baked item or make a meringue or whatever, you're good to go. And it actually works better, to be honest with you, after you freeze it. And the reason is that the freezing starts to kind of unravel some of the proteins that are in the egg whites. And so then when you start to whip it, it's kind of like that process has already gotten started and you're just finishing it when you do the whipping up of the egg whites. So don't forget to do that. Or you could just, you know, scramble some eggs, I guess. Herbs are another one that's kind of a tricky one. And I always hear that the herbs go to waste. So if you have a bunch of something like cilantro, parsley, that sort of thing, those you want to store in a glass of water like it's a cut flower. And for the parsley and the cilantro, I would put that in the fridge. For something like basil, which is much more sensitive to cold, I put it in water and just leave it on my countertop, and it stays fine for a number of days. So just think about with the herbs. Before I put the parsley and cilantro in the fridge, I usually cover it loosely with a plastic bag of some sort, grocery bag, or even wrap a little saran around whatever you have, just to help keep it fresh. Another thing I freeze all the time are nuts. I toast up a big batch of walnuts that maybe I'm going to use on a salad or something, and I stick them in, again, some kind of a little reusable freezer bag, and then throw it in the freezer, and it'll keep them for a long time. I was also reading that you could freeze wine. So if you have a glass of wine and you have half a bottle left, again, use this, although I don't know. The concept of leftover wine, it doesn't exist too much in my house. But if you have wine left over, you can freeze it in here and then use it for like a pan sauce. So, all right. So that's kind of my spiel about the freezing. before I forget, I do also want to talk about expiration dates and best by dates and all of that. So let me just randomly see if I can find something in my fridge. All right, here's the mustard. Best by March 9, 2022. So here's the deal. There is no government agency that has deemed best by or consume by dates as like a law. These dates are about quality, not about, is it bad or is it not suitable to eat? So you can go ahead and Google this if you'd like, but basically all the best by dates are really the suggestion to use up this mustard by March of 2022 for optimum flavor and maybe texture, depending on what it is that you're looking at. So don't get too freaked out by the best by dates or the use by dates. Certain things, obviously like meat, you need to pay attention to. If I find, a pack of chicken breasts that I kind of forgot about in my fridge and it expired 2 days ago, I don't throw it out. You want to open it up and just smell it. So you want to use your sense of smell to help define, is this okay to move forward with and eat or not? So if it smells fine and it doesn't really smell like a sour scent or anything, then you're good. So just keep that in mind. The dates, the expiration dates are not like super cut and dried, like you must eat it by this date and then throw it out. So I just wanted to mention that before I forgot about that. I'll put my mustard away here. All right. So let's see. Tickling. Yes. All right. A little more on storage. Just a couple other little tips. So if you have some leftover cookies, they will keep longer if you put them in an airtight container with a slice of bread. And if they do get a little stale, then think about how else you could use those. Maybe you crumble them on top of ice cream on like a little sundae for some kids. Maybe you sprinkle them in with your granola and have a little treat. So you kind of have to get creative. Potato chips are another good one that kind of ends up getting thrown out because they might go stale. So you can keep those in your refrigerator as well, especially if you're in a climate where there's high humidity. That will help keep the chips from just getting super soggy. So you can keep them in your fridge. And that should work for about 2 weeks. Also, another good one that I like to think about is you go to the store, you get a rotisserie chicken, you eat all the meats. What do we do with the bones? So you can actually reuse the carcass and make a very simple, basic chicken stock out of that. So you just put your chicken carcass into a pot. You can add like half of an onion, a couple bay leaves, about 5 or 6 cups of water, and then simmer it. And actually you could add, some of this that I have back here, a couple peppercorns, maybe some other herbs, maybe some stems from your parsley that might be sitting around, some of your garlic peels or garlic cloves that maybe got smashed, throw those in too. And then just simmer it for about half an hour, maybe 45 minutes, and then you have kind of a simple little stock to work with. So I think, how are we doing on time? Good. All right. So I think those are about all of my little talking points here. I'm just checking here because I have this huge list. We talked about the freezing. Okay, yes. So as Marie mentioned, the goal is to get your food to people. So don't forget about gleaning teams that are out there. I know that Rotary is helping with gleaning. And again, if this grant should come through, we will be expanding, actually not us, but we'll be helping Food is Free Solano expand their gleaning initiative, which is all over the county right now. So in that effort to get food to people first, and then animals, and then composting. So I did want to mention that Sustainable Solano is having a composting class coming up. Lucky you guys. It's via Zoom on Thursday, October 14 from 6 to 7:30 p.m. And Lori Caldwell, who's taught a few classes with us before, she's leading it. She's awesome. So if you're interested in getting started with composting, I highly recommend checking out that class. I was thinking, Allison, maybe you could put a link in the chat, like to our calendar or something about that class. So one last thing I do want to mention, I'm just going to plug another event that's going on right now, which kind of Marie mentioned restaurants. So this week we're launching Bounty of the County. And this is a celebration of local food and farms and independent restaurants here in Solano County. What we've done is we've matched up, roughly matched up, 6 different restaurants and 5 local farms. And so starting this week, the restaurants will be using produce acquired from the local farms, and they will be offering free tastes of whatever they make. They're kind of coming up with these awesome, little tasting dishes. So if you go into the restaurant and book a table and order a meal, you will then get a free taste during that particular restaurant's featured week. So keep an eye on our social media page and YouTube page. We'll have cooking videos by some of the other chefs on Tuesdays, and then we're going to be airing farm profile videos on Wednesdays. And there's more on all of that on our website as well. So, and if you do go, ask your restaurants if they're ready to recycle and their food, or at least channel it out and get it out to where it needs to go and not go into the landfill. So I think I'm going to stop there and see if there are any questions about any of this or questions for Marie.
There are questions. I'm going to share in the chat real quick the survey,
Yes,
just
the survey.
for while we're doing questions, if anyone would like to grab that link, that will help us for future classes and programs. So just kind of in the order that they came in, and if anyone has additional questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. But in talking about the pesto made with the tops, question about what makes for a good pesto. There was the person was saying they tried to make radish top pesto and it ended up being bitter. So if there were any suggestions for the bitterness, or if there's certain things you would recommend for making pesto out of.
Sure. So the carrot tops you can use in combination with basil. I would probably do about half and half. Other good things for pesto are parsley. I've done a cilantro walnut pesto, which is excellent on steak of some sort. I tend to just start with like the herb or the combination of herbs. Arugula would also work, although arugula is a little bit peppery, but you can combine that also with probably some parsley and maybe even the carrot tops, actually. I think that would be fine. So I typically just start with my bunch of herbs, and then you just kind of think about what's in a normal, like a traditional basil pesto. You've got some kind of a nut, garlic for sure, and maybe some Parmesan cheese, although that's optional if you don't do dairy. Olive oil, salt and pepper, and that's really about it. So I would just kind of stick with that basic formula, and you can swap out the herbs and use other greens. If you do a traditional basil pesto, what does help is to add some parsley to that pesto, because the basil tends to oxidize, and so it'll turn kind of this weird, brownish, kind of like how avocados turn brown on the outside. So you can add in some parsley, which will help it retain that nice green color. But really, it's kind of like the sky's the limit on making pestos. You can put together all sorts of different combinations of things. I think there are some pesto recipes on our website too. I'm thinking of kind of an oddball one that I did actually at the Open Farm Days. It was a roasted tomato and walnut pesto. So in that case, the tomatoes got cooked, and then it went in with some garlic and some walnuts. And I think there were some anchovies maybe that went in there just for a little extra kick, and then the olive oil and salt and pepper. So, but I would say, the pesto is a good go-to for herbs that are starting to kind of go, starting to go south, or if you just have an abundance of things in your garden too. So.
And I apologize if I missed it. Anything for the bitterness? Did you already cover that?
For the bitterness. Well, for the radish, I don't think I would use radish tops in a pesto. I think I would cook those. Yeah, I think those would do better cooked. And again, you could cook them with some other greens. If those are too bitter for you, you could cook them up with some other greens, puree, stick in one of these, put it in your freezer. what I used to do is I used to cook spinach and kale and puree it and put it in here. And then I would thaw them out and throw it into my kids' scrambled eggs and be like, look, it's green eggs, like green eggs and ham. So just kind of another way you can, throw it into a smoothie. Bananas mask just about everything in a smoothie. So it's just, I'm thinking of ways you can kind of use these greens. But in terms of the bitterness, yeah, I think by cooking it, that's going to help. Also, what you can add if you've sauteed your radishes with your radish greens is I would add a little squeeze of lemon juice along with your olive oil that you're going to have in there as well. And that the lemon might help cut that. Okay.
Great. So about the storage, there was a question like if you aren't going to use the tops that day, same with potato skins, can you freeze them? Do you refrigerate them? What should you do if you're planning to use them later?
So for the tops, like the carrot tops or the beet tops, yes. If I separate these out, then what I would do is wash my beet tops in like a big bowl of water. And then I would spin it dry as much as possible in a salad spinner, and then put that into a container with maybe some, a little bit of like paper towel to help suck up the moisture. Because the issue with the tops is that once they start to get wet, and if they stay wet, then they're going to start to break down. So your tops want to be dry. Meanwhile, the roots kind of want a little bit of that moisture. Okay, so then what was the other part of that question, Allison? I know there was something.
Yeah, the question was just, is if you could you freeze them or just refrigerate them? And then, the same with the potato skins. Like, do you need to handle those differently?
So the potato skins, if you're not going to deal with the chips or something right away, yes, you could refrigerate those for, I would say, at least 2 or 3 days. Again, they might start to oxidize a little bit on the other underside, but when you cook them and they crisp, that might change their color depending on what kind of potato you're using anyway. So, but yeah, you could refrigerate those for a little bit. Freezing, you might get kind of a strange texture change, I think, on the potato skins. So I would recommend just refrigerate until you're ready to make the chips. Let's see. And then for, if you don't, I think we already talked about the tops. If you don't want to use those right away, then definitely put in the fridge, keep them dry until you're ready to use them. And date them so you know when you put them in there to begin with.
Great. So I think this next question is a good one for Marie to weigh in on. There was a question of whether our own composting at home also creates methane. How does that factor into the equation?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so with home, if you're composting, I was trying to turn the video back on, but we'll go without it. If you're composting at home, we would be collecting it. When we're able to put it in your green waste cart, we'll be collecting it weekly, and it will go to our composting facility. And there they have aerators, they have a way of covering it so that as it's breaking down, it isn't causing the methane gas. And what there is, they're capping it and using that as well.
So then does our little compost pile at home create methane? Is it better for it to be going in the green waste bin, or how does that?
The amount, if you're home composting, it's probably such a small amount that I don't think it would be a problem. And part of it, you're turning it and that heat is going back into the pile. So you're probably okay with the home composting.
Okay, great. I'm not sure if it's a question, but there was a comment about the chicken, Stephanie, saying that the liquid that pools around the chicken may smell, but if you rinse off the chicken and it smells fine, you're good to go. Do you agree with that?
I think we're talking about the raw chicken. If you open up a pack of raw chicken,
yeah,
when they're vacuum sealed, you sometimes do get an odor when you first open it up. So yes, you could rinse, definitely, and that'll kind of help that. But it's really just from the packaging process. And unless it smells really sour, you're okay. Yeah.
Okay. And then there was a question, you mentioned if you use up the yolks and have whites left over, what if you only need the whites? Any suggestions for using the egg yolks?
Well, the yolks unfortunately won't freeze well. So I think you're just going to have to scramble them and eat them. The other thing about eggs is that you don't want to, it's called pooling. So you don't really want to pool your eggs, meaning I crack open maybe 6 or 8 or 10 and put them in a bowl and just leave them there in the fridge for a while. So you want to, I mean, it's okay for, you know, an hour or so while you're getting something ready, or even a few hours, but typically you don't combine them and then just let them sit there. So if you're separating and you're freezing your whites, then the yolks, I think you're just going to have to kind of use them. I don't think they freeze as well as the whites do. So, yep. Although this is a question from Marie, could we throw it in the green waste? Could it go into the compost? I think maybe it could, because you were saying that like any, you know, if pizza, and I'm just thinking of like other high fat foods like cheese can go in there. You know, if there's really not a use for those yolks, what would we do with them, Marie? Sure. Oh,
sorry about that. Yes, you can put them in your yard waste cart when that program starts. Anything, meat, cheese, bones, any of that you're not going to use, even if you find that chicken just doesn't quite smell right, you can put it in there still. You want to wrap, just to keep your cart clean though, you may want to take either some newspaper or one of those, you know, extra paper shopping bags or anything like that. If you've been wiping off your counter without chemicals and that, and let it soak it up a little bit so that it's not just the food waste going straight into the cart like that. I'd suggest throwing it in a brown bag, or I'm sure Ace Hardware is going to be carrying the small compostable bags as soon as this program hits.
Right. Yeah.
Just no plastic, please.
Right.
And then there was a question about whether there are any tops of root vegetables that might be toxic or unsafe to eat, ones that we should avoid.
You know, the only one I can really think of is rhubarb, which is not really a root. You know, it's those stalks. So the tops are a bit toxic. The stalks are totally fine. You know, another one though would be potatoes that do start to sprout. I'm forgetting the name, but they can create, and also if they are green, sometimes your potatoes are just really green. So I don't recommend consuming those. So really sprouty potatoes and green potatoes, those would probably be best either channeled to an animal or put into the compost. But yeah, those are really the only ones I can think of. I mean, I'm thinking of like other ones like turnip. You know, sometimes I get Tokyo turnips in my Eat Well CSA box, and I've cooked those greens before. Daikon radish, just another kind of a radish top that you can use. Let's see, I don't know, what am I forgetting? I know there might be another weird one out there. Kind of thinking through all the fall and winter vegetables coming up. Yeah, I don't know. Leeks are tricky. You know, people have asked about the leek tops. They're tough. They don't really cook down. They will get soft. So I would say for the leek, this would be the dark green tops of the leeks. Those would be fine in your veggie stock, and then just, you know, it'll get strained. But that's one that's a little tricky. I mean, other spring onions and scallions you can eat. You know, the bottoms and the tops are just more tender and a little more palatable, but the leeks you would just put into a stock, I would say.
Okay, great. Well, that's it for the questions.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Again, check out the composting class if you're interested in starting to compost. And Marie, I have a question, one last question. How will we know when the program launches? Will there be flyers? Will there be ads? Like, how is this all going to roll out? Oh, I think you're muted, Marie. She might still be muted. Oh, there she is.
There we go. Takes a second to get it back in there. So tell me your question again. I'm sorry.
So I was just wondering how, like, what's the advertising and the marketing going to be about the new recycling program? Are we going to see flyers? Will there be ads? Like, how do we know kind of the timing of it and when, when the general public is going to need to step it up, I guess.
If you receive the city email blast, you can sign up for that. And that's a good way. They put those out once a week, usually on Mondays, and it gives you all kinds of information about the city. Definitely will be in your service guides, will be at farmers market, will be putting ads in the paper, flyers in your bill, and on our website. So definitely will be out there.
Awesome. There's one more resource that I did want to share, Allison. This was those two links that I sent. So one of them is just called Stop Waste. This is another organization who's working very focused on cutting back on food waste specifically, but other waste in general. So their website, I believe, is in the chat. There's another chef who has teamed up with them. I think her business is called Ends and Stems. And so she has a lot of recommendations for meal planning to kind of help reduce food waste. And then the other resource is the Master Food Preservers of Solano and Yolo counties. And so if you really want to get into a little more in-depth on canning, dehydrating, other types of preserving, I highly recommend checking them out. They also offer classes. In fact, I think tonight they were also doing a dehydrating class. So check them out. They have, all kinds of information on water bath canning and other types of, other types of preserving, which will then help you extend the life of some of those veggies and fruits that might be sitting around in your house.